Hello, I'm Julia Fisher and you're listening to The Olive Tree, the programme that brings you stories of Jewish and Arab believers direct from the Holy Land to help give an understanding of what God is doing in this region of the world, despite the ongoing unrest and tension that we hear so much about. My guest today is called Simon Stout, and he has a surprising story to tell. A few years ago, he would never have imagined himself coming to believe that Jesus was the Messiah, and that he would become the coordinator of a prayer ministry in Tel Aviv. So, when I met him in Tel Aviv, he told me his story.
I'm originally from Indianapolis, Indiana in the United States.
And from a religious Jewish background?
I came from a family of Reformed Jews, and it's very, very almost secular in its belief system. I was told by my rabbi once that it might be okay that I didn't believe in God, and if asked questions as who's the Messiah, he might even say that we are the Messiah that is to come, and not to follow the scriptural prophecies.
So what did you think of all this sort of teaching when you were a young man growing up? Did you take it seriously?
So I think I didn't really connect with my Judaism growing up as a kid. I connected with the fact that I was Jewish. I saw maybe some persecution as a Jew, even from the Christian community in the United States. Our house was egged on Easter maybe once or twice, and I was told by several of my friends at school that I was burning in hell because I was Jewish. And so I think at that point I clung to the identity as a Jew, but I didn't in any way connect to the religious aspect growing up. It wasn't until I was much older. There's a thing called Birthright Israel, which invites Jewish students from throughout the entire world, from the U.S., India, etc., to come and spend time in Israel for a period of about 2 weeks. And so when I was in college, I decided I wanted to do that. As part of that, I got to see the country Poland. It was a special version of the tour that you could pay a little extra money and go see Poland. And so I spent about a week in Poland, where I saw concentration camp after concentration camp, and we toured around even with an Auschwitz survivor, and then came to Israel. And at that point in time, I saw that God was real. I think for the first time in my life, I saw that, well, maybe perhaps through the darkness, something good can come out of it, and that God created Israel. And I think at that point is where I started connecting to my Judaism, and my desire to come to Israel came into being.
That's very interesting. When you left America, presumably you had every intention of going back, that this trip was just of interest.
Yes, I came here as a student, getting my master's degree at Tel Aviv University. I had every intention to stay here for maybe 2 or 3 years. I had a goal list at one time of 5 goals that I wanted to accomplish in my life, and one of them was spending some time in Israel, and I thought I was kind of checking it off my list. Little did I know that within a period of a few months after moving to Israel, that I would become a believer in Yeshua, Jesus, as my Messiah, and maybe come into an understanding that I was called to be here as a Jewish person.
So your life took a few detours. So what happened to change your life? Who did you meet?
So I met 2 lovely ladies at the university. Both happened to be Messianic believers believers in Yeshua, and they were also from the United States, and they invited me to attend the local congregation in Tel Aviv. I went to that. I thought it was very, very strange, but I was really open to anything at the time. I had seen a Hindi saint only a few months before, the hugging saint, if you've heard of her. I didn't spend the 3 hours in line to hug her, but I was willing and open to go and see things and experience things. And so over a period of a few weeks, I started attending Bible studies, and I think for the first time I was introduced to Jesus as, I guess, in the way that's the truth, because all I had known was that I was burning in hell. I had never really experienced the fact that he was the prophesied Messiah. And so I started taking that to heart, and it was recommended to to pray every night in my prayers to ask if Yeshua was real. In that time, I had a series of dreams about floods in New York City and China, places where I've never lived, and I didn't understand it. But at the end of a few months, we had a conference about dreams and visions, and that the Lord was still speaking to people today. And at the end of that conference, they asked us to turn in any of the dreams that we had, and they said they'd get back to us via email. So I turned in my 2 dreams about the floods in New York City, where it was complete chaos, and where in China the same flood had gone through Beijing, and it was just completely calm. And that night, the same people who had been leading the conference ended up giving the message at our congregation. And so for their message, he had read through all the dreams, and he decided that the 2 dreams that I had turned in were worthy to speak about, that he really felt that these were a word from the Lord. And so I guess at that point in time, I realized that God was really speaking to me, and that the things I had heard from the previous days were true. But even that wasn't enough, I think. It wasn't until the end of that evening. There was the woman of the couple that was leading the conference. They were running out of the service. Our last worship song was going. They had their luggage in their hand on their way to the airport. But the woman, she let down her piece of luggage. She came up and put her hand on my shoulder. I was sitting in the middle of a crowd of people, and she put her hand on my shoulder, and she said, "God hears your prayers. Yeshua is real, and he has great plans for your life." And so at that point, I just knew everything I had prayed was true, and I cried many tears that night and laughed with much joy and gave my heart to Yeshua as the Messiah that evening.
Simon, just explain to our listeners what it means, what conflict there is for a young Jewish person like you to take a New Testament and read it for the first time.
I think that everything I was taught growing up as a child is that if you believe that Jesus is the Messiah, that you give up your Judaism completely. And it's a false understanding. We have had little teaching or understanding that Yeshua and his disciples were Jewish. It was just a giant wall that's been built, partially because of historical reasons through the Inquisition and the Crusades, but also just because culturally Jews like to separate themselves. And so of all the things I was taught to believe and not to believe, one thing I was specifically taught that I could not believe was that Yeshua was the Messiah, that Jesus was the Messiah of the Jewish people. And I think that created a great barrier with me and many Jews today. My brothers came to faith before I did, actually, and I can tell you that, like Paul, the apostle, I was angry. I didn't know why I was angry. It was just I had been taught that it was wrong, that they were giving up everything that they knew in order to believe, and I now know that that's not the truth. In fact, I feel much more Jewish at times as a believer, feeling that I can and give my all, worship God, that I can speak to God personally than I felt beforehand.
Who then discipled you? Who taught you? Who encouraged you in those early days?
So I had a series of teachers. Of course, I met with Pastor Avi Mizrahi a few times, and we had meetings, and he also helped to immerse me, baptize me in the water here in Israel. I ended up meeting one-on-one regularly with a man who was an evangelist and who attended our congregation regularly, and he taught me many great things about obedience and what it really means to walk forth in the ways of God. And about a year after I came to faith, there was a prayer ministry that was connected with our congregation that started an intercessory prayer school. And my wife and I, who I ended up marrying, she was one of the ladies from the university, ended up taking this prayer school. And I think it changed my life. It changed a way that I can not only pray for myself and the needs of myself, but really to intercede for the people of this country and as we know, the battle is not of flesh and blood, but it's really of principalities and powers and the rulers of the darkness of this age. And so I was taught to really pray. And I think that school lasted about a year and a half, and it deeply impacted my walk with the Lord.
When did you appreciate that sense of destiny, that sense of calling?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I think that I have to say I have to keep to that calling and that sense of appreciation every day. It's a renewing thing. I've had people who came who had an understanding of prophecy, who've prophesied over me, and that put things in my heart. I read the Bible and read Scripture, and certain scriptures really spoke to me about staying in the land and that our hands will prosper. But I really think living in Israel is a difficult thing, and so I think it's a renewal thing every day, as to what we're really called to continue to be here, even just to be a light. Sometimes I spend a lot of time with my family, and I feel like I'm spending less time doing ministry, even while I'm working in full-time ministry. But I know that by teaching my children and by praying for them and by taking care of my wife and praying for her and taking care of our home, that's also just being a light in this nation.
Simon Stout sharing his story, and we'll hear more from Simon on next week's programme. You're listening to The Olive Tree with me, Julia Fisher, and the Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund is a Christian charity based in the UK that supports the needs of both Jewish believers and Arab Christians living in Israel and the wider Middle East. If you would like to know more about our work and receive our free bi-monthly newsletter, please either visit our website, olivetreefund.org, or write to me, Julia Fisher, at the Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund, P.O. Box 850, Horsham, RH12 9GA in the UK. Join me at the same time next week for another story from the Olive Tree. Until then, goodbye.